a good morning from wherever you're watching us, and welcome to our show, Votes and Views, a show airing exclusively on zonknews, a space where we discuss substantive matters of national and international interest. I'm your host, Ngaira, and present with me this morning is Dr. Tom Wolf. Tom is an independent research analyst. The subject of our discussion is, are opinion polls a true reflection of the voter's voice? Are opinion polls a true reflection of the voter's voice? Tom, welcome to the show.
Good morning to you too.
Thank you. And so, to get us started, with the vast experience you've had in research, evaluation, analysis, and assessment, how do you compare the Kenyan perception of opinion polls vis-a-vis other countries across the globe?
It is often the case, as your question was suggesting, that many people will approve or reject polls depending on where they support the position that they have, whether with regard to issues or a political party or even a candidate. That people will pick up a coffee and be very happy if a poll shows that their favored, say, presidential candidate is leading or is certain to win even, and they will reject them, condemn them, make accusations and so on when the results don't make them happy. But I actually think that's a minority. So much depends on, first of all, whether a media house, whether it's Standard Group, whether it's Nation Group, whether it's Zonk, if people are becoming familiar with that, whether they trust you people. Because we know that all these media houses, to some extent, have a kichungi, have a filtering system. So if they think that the company or the group, organization, whatever it is that released a survey is not known, is not credible, has not produced some work maybe before or has a leadership that can be trusted, they won't publish them. Now we know with social media these days, anybody can have a website and they can put on their own survey results. And I know of at least 2 surveys in the last month that I found on social media, but no mainstream media house published them. And I was speaking to one political editor earlier this week, and he said, we had a debate, an internal debate. But when we examined the actual data and the way it was presented, including the methodology, we had doubts about whether this poll had integrity, whether the results were true. So we decided not to publish it. For example, I don't know anything about nuclear weapons, almost zero, except that they can kill millions of people. If I voted for an American president because I like his party or his record and so on, and he comes back, or his people come back from a negotiation with Iran about controlling Iran's nuclear program, and he says, this treaty will keep America safe because of AB, I tend to believe him. I don't know anything about how nuclear weapons work or how much protection our defense system has in the US, but I have to trust somebody who's an expert. So in the same way, many Kenyans, I don't know what percentage, but if a mainstream media house decides to publish something, they will give it, in more cases than not, the benefit of the doubt, even if they're unhappy with it. And even if they might say publicly, it's bogus, it's fake, it's corrupted, blah, blah, the fact that a mainstream media house has published it will give it more credibility, not maybe 100%. So that's one issue. But coming now more to the kind of nuts and bolts, it is, in my view, and I think generally accepted, that even if the survey firm that has released the results is well known and has been doing work of different types for different clients, as well as polls in the past, it's very important to examine the methodology that they used. We could discuss this in great detail, we don't have time, but the most important being, were the people who were interviewed an accurately representative sample of the wider Kenyan public? And I'll give you a simple example. If you want to find out among Kenyans what's their favorite flavor of ice cream, you can't interview people who don't know what ice cream is. Or maybe they know, but they never tasted it. You have to first ask people when you're getting your sample, Je, umewahi kula kitu kinachoitwa ice cream? If somebody says yes, then you can say, rangi gani inakupendeza zaidi? Is it chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, whatever it is? you better make sure that the people you're interviewing actually know what you want to find out. So you have to look at the sample. And in this case, for general purposes of politics, you better make sure that, for example, if the population of Nairobi, and more specifically, by the time we get to the end of IEBC registration, if the population of registered voters of Nairobi is, say, 10% of all the registered voters in Kenya, you better make sure that in your sample, 10% of the people you interviewed were from Nairobi. And I know the voting registered population of Nairobi is around 10%. But which people are you going to interview in Nairobi? If they're going to be an accurate representation of the Nairobi population, you can't sit out on the street at the corner of Kenyatta Avenue and Uhuru Highway and Haile Selassie and just interview people who are walking by. Because not everybody in Nairobi goes anywhere near that corner. You have to use census data to interview people in their houses, when they're there, to make sure that by the time you finish the 200 or whatever interviews that you've allocated for Nairobi based on census, that those people are an accurate reflection of the population in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of education level, in terms of ethnic group. Not because you've said, oh, next I need to interview somebody who's 25, or next I need to interview a woman. No, it's the way you've gone to the houses and the way you've made a selection of everybody within a household that the result that you get at the end of the day is an accurate reflection of what you know is in the census. And that's why in some African countries, you can't do opinion polling properly because they don't have accurate censuses. The Kenyan census, the National Bureau of Statistics, is one of the most professional and, I can say, not just hardworking, but careful, professional in all of Africa. So therefore, we rely, in this case, 2019 census data, to make sure every time we do a survey that the sample that we're getting in terms of age, education, ethnic group, religion, so on, is an accurate reflection of the population as a whole. But you people in media, if you're going to publish, you better take a look. And let me just add one other thing. Because, okay, now these days, because of COVID, we're doing mostly mobile phone polls. Where do we get these mobile phone numbers? We don't just guess. For the past years, when we have done surveys at households, which have been scientifically allocated in our sample, each sample being a bit different, at the end of the interview, we usually ask people, do you or does somebody else in the household have a mobile phone? People. And in Kenya, 90% or more will say yes now. Because the mobile phone distribution in Kenya is, again, almost the highest in Africa. And then we ask, uchukubali kutupatia, or if it's an individual, kunipatia simu yako alafu wakati mwingine ujao, kama tunafanya utafiti kwa kupigia watu simu, we can interview, and most 100% of Kenyans agree, because Kenyans love to be interviewed. So we have tens of thousands of these phone numbers. So if somebody comes to us and say, I'm running for governor of, I don't know, let's say Kakamega, or I'm thinking of running, can you do a survey for me in Kakamega? We can say yes. We can do it either by calling people or we can go on the ground because now COVID is going down. So we have to make sure that the people who are selected for interviews represent the population that we claim that they do in order to fit the needs of the client or also a company's needs, because you people in the media are going to question us, or you should, even more than you do, about the sample, or the people out there, especially those who are unhappy. And anybody who's unhappy, they don't have a legal right, but I cannot believe, if I got a phone call. In fact, this happened once, then I'll stop, before the last election. Somebody on one of the campaign teams, a very senior advisor, was unhappy with the survey we did when I was at that other company. I want to see your sampling. I went to the boss of the company. I said, so-and-so has called me, he's challenging us. He wants to meet over a cup of tea. Can I show him exactly where people were interviewed? He said, yeah, go. So I went, I showed him in each sampling area. But what we also were doing, we were showing on a map of Kenya, putting a red mark wherever our sampling teams went and whether ever they did their quotas of 16 or 32 interviews. So people, if they said we did Upper Eastern, we know, did they actually go to Moyale? Did they actually go to Marsabit? And how many interviews were done in those places? Leave aside Eastern as a whole. So if you want it to be representative, make sure you check the methodology. Now, does that mean that even if you do a perfectly scientific sample, somebody can't say, oh, instead of giving so-and-so 5%, give him 50%? Of course, you could do that kind of rigging and nobody would know. But that's why, to conclude, I, as basically an academic, I'm always more comfortable if I see 2, 3, 4, 5 survey firms releasing data on the same issues, so we can be a check against each other. You know, in the US, when you had, before the last election, even now on Biden's approval rating, President Biden, the website 538.com, they do an average of all the polls that have been done within, say, the last 2 weeks, and they get an average. Because these polls will differ somewhat based on statistical margin of error and also based on some sampling methodology differences and so on. So I always say there's safety in numbers. The more polls you have, the more you can see the difference. And if you see a difference that goes outside of the margin error, you people in the media have to ask, why do you explain the difference? Was your question worded exactly the same way? Was it asked in the same sequence? Was there any question that came just before that maybe moved people in a certain direction by the time you asked that question? By saying, of the presidential candidates, which ones do you think are corrupt? And then you ask who you're going to vote for. So somebody who might be prepared to vote for somebody they think is corrupt would be shy to say so. So you have to look at the context to make sure not that just that the sampling was the same across all the firms, but that the order of the questions. And finally, were these surveys conducted more or less at the same time? Because we know things happen in Kenya every day in politics. Something can happen this morning, and then if we ask the question in the afternoon, the same question we asked yesterday, the result could be different because something happened. Somebody said they were making an alliance with somebody, or somebody was taken to EACC with corruption charges, or somebody, I don't know what, got married and that made people happy. I mean, so you have to look, what's the time period in which these surveys have been conducted before you can compare the results and know that the results are absolutely comparable. So there are many issues, as you can see, that you're raising in your question, but it's good for you people in media who are reporting, because often it's the messenger that's more important than the message.
True. So great take on that. Thank you. And make us understand, in the recent past, we've had situations whereby the NGOs and the medias were able to sponsor these opinion polls. But what we are seeing is that the sponsoring has gradually gone down, and there is no more publishing of these opinion polls. I really don't know what's your comment on this.
You know, I can see you're a very keen observer of the media, Mr. Collins, maybe because you're in media. I mean, they've almost vanished. Compared to the previous 3 elections, we had a number of survey firms that were conducting and releasing to the media surveys like 2 years before the election. I haven't seen any presidential voting intention polls yet. Now, of course, when you ask the question, you can't really say who would you vote for, because it's like you go into a hotel, you want to have lunch, you can't decide what you're going to eat until the waiter brings you the menu. So until you actually have the ballot, and you know even now with who are the running mates and who are the coalitions, who's in where, it's difficult to say who would you vote for. But you can ask the question, as of now, thinking about those people who might be candidates, who would you like the next president to be? There's nothing wrong with that question, whether you're a registered voter or not. But don't say when you publish, nani yuko na nafasi kuchaguliwa rais. No, you can just say, those who has the most popularity now is so-and-so, has this percent and so on, just popularity. NGOs, I know from talking to my friends in so-called civil society, especially the ones in good governance or governance NGOs, compared to 10 years ago, they are being starved for funding. They're not getting the money, especially from overseas donors, especially the Western countries, that they used to. Now, you can do your own research and find out why that is. And you can go around to some embassies from representing countries that are democracies and ask, is it true? Are you allocating less money to some of these NGOs that have been noisemakers in the past? The they're having trouble getting enough money, because you are correct in your question. In the past, that many of the surveys that I was involved in, some of the money to finance them, and some of them could easily cost up to 2 million. We used to get questions from these NGOs, not the question, who would you vote for, but other questions about the electoral environment, how much confidence people have in IEBC, whether people fear violence and so on, for their own programmatic work. And we're not getting very many of these NGOs coming forward now, because they tell me, they apologize, they say, atuna funding, atuna, ufadili, we're just not getting the support that we used to. Second, and finally, I can tell you, there's been a little bit of shyness among some of my friends in the survey firms about releasing a poll now, because not only from the Star, but from other information, the DP has been very active. DP William Ruto has been very active. And I think as of now, because the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga has not formally announced his candidacy, he's the only one that everybody is convinced he's going to be on the ballot.
So allow me to take you back a little bit. Haven't we had situations whereby these politicians have teamed up to be able to sponsor an opinion poll?
I don't know what you mean by teamed up.
I mean, haven't we had, maybe for instance, for the Kenyan perception, I would take the ODM party teaming up maybe with the quote-unquote UDA, just for the sake of sponsoring an opinion poll, for them to be able maybe to understand what's their position?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. Yes, since I started doing this work before the 2007 election, there are a number of political parties or even individual candidates who have come to the company that I was working for, and I know I've come to some other companies also, and hired them to do surveys, both at the national level and at the county level. For constituencies, individual parliamentary constituencies, I don't remember those. But in all of those cases, we gave them the data. They were never published. They were used internally for their campaign strategizing. So, and I am also aware of even some campaigns, this was even revealed by BBC. The Jubilee in 2013 hired a company, a market survey firm, which has never released anything public on politics. But they're an established firm. They belong to the Market Survey Research Association of Kenya. And they did 2 surveys for Jubilee with 50,000 respondents, more than 1,000 in each county. And we found about that from the documentary on BBC, where they were working, there was this group in England, Cambridge Analytica, which was analyzing the data. And we in Kenya, including me, would never have found out about those surveys if BBC had not done that investigative documentary. But even aside from that, as I've told you, yes, there are times that they come together. However, I can also remember a couple of occasions where after we released, some politician or political parties came to us and said, can we buy the raw data? Because we want to see exactly where in the country and from which respondents they were favoring us or not favoring us. And then we sell the data. There's no problem. There's no law against that. We believe by and large, that the more public life in Kenya is guided, not controlled, but is guided by science, the better it is for everybody. I'll give you one final example. In 1974 in Ethiopia, they're having a big problem in Ethiopia now. There was a big famine. There was all kinds of money being collected, relief. The emperor then, before he was overthrown, Haile Selassie, there were no opinion polls in Ethiopia. I read a book. It said even his closest advisors were afraid to tell him, Your Highness, Emperor, watu wanakufa na njaa. Hata kuna maandamano wanakuja hapa Addis kuomba chakula. They didn't tell him until they were just at the edge of the city. So he never knew. I don't know what was wrong with his national intelligence. And then his government ilipinduliwa na jeshi. So knowing what's out there among the population, even when it's not good news, if you're a leader or you want to be a leader, you better find out what are the people in your country or your constituency concerned about. Because don't tell me they only care about tribe. That's not true. And in many counties or parliamentary races, everybody's of the same tribe. So people are going to be concerned about issues, including your own, how they perceive you, your track record, and so on. So it's good to know. We had a by-election in Msambweni. The candidate who won had been a personal assistant from the member of parliament who had died. That was the late Suleiman Dori. Now, it was reported in the media, I found it online, that a year or so before Mheshimiwa Dori died, he had sacked his personal assistant because some money in his house went missing. I think it was CDF money. And he accused his PA, his personal assistant, of stealing the money. And that had been reported in the media. Yet this is the fellow who won the election. Now, did he do a survey during that campaign to find out, A, how many people in Msambweni know that I was accused by my former boss, the late MP, of stealing this money? And if they do they care? I don't know if he did a survey or not. All I'm saying is, if you are planning a campaign strategy, the more information you have about your potential voters, even in that case, are they inclined to vote? Are they likely to vote? That is what we call political intelligence. And if you can afford it, it's in your interest to get it.
Grateful. And that one leads us to this next question. Owing to insufficient technical capacity, have we had instances where pollsters may have published results, faulty results in this case? And if yes, how does this contribute to the negative reputation of a company?
Would you say as of now, Kenya is heading in the right direction or the wrong direction? And we get a figure, as TIFA got in its last survey, that 72% of people in that sample of 1,500 said wrong direction. Now, if you ask me, is that result faulty? I have to ask myself, what do you mean by that? There's two ways it could be faulty. Number one, the real figure that we got from our respondents was different and we rigged. We gave a false result. We said 72 when really it was only 50% who said wrong direction. Or maybe 90% said wrong direction. But for whatever reason, we decided to release a figure of 72%. That is an incorrect or a faulty result, okay? Now, in another way it could be faulty, going back to what I said earlier, maybe we didn't interview a correct sample. Maybe we interviewed too many people in Nairobi because we were lazy. Maybe we didn't interview anybody in Northeastern or in Northern Kenya where there's a terrible drought. So we get a biased sample. And that's why our 72% was incorrect. Or maybe we only interviewed people who own vehicles and they're not suffering as much as people who don't. So when you ask this question about the past record of polling, the accusations or possibilities of faulty, you would need to specify in your answer what you mean by faulty. But just to kind of summarize, because there's no way of knowing for sure whether Kenya is going in the right direction or not, because it's a subjective question. Even if we ask people the what's the main reason you say so? And people will say right direction or wrong direction, because of the economy or because of COVID or because of insecurity or whatever. So do we know what they're thinking about? It's an opinion. But if we ask people next week or in 10 days there's going to be an election, who are you going to vote for? And then we give a result. And then the election takes place and the result is different. Is that result faulty? Well, if it's within the margin of error of 1 or 2 or 3%, depending on sample size, it's not faulty because the survey firms always say there's a margin of error based on the sample size, okay? And in this case, first you'd have to ask people in that sample, are you intending to vote? People don't have if they're not registered, whatever, you can't ask them that question. If you're trying to kind of predict the actual result. But if the result is different, the first thing you have to ask is, how many days passed between when the interviews took place and when the voting took place? And did anything happen in those days that might have changed people's mind, especially the percentage who said they were undecided when you interviewed them? Because the percentage of undecided, or even the people who said, sitaki kujibu hilo swali, you have to look at those who wouldn't answer the question. Because maybe they've decided, but they haven't told you for whatever reasons. So the first thing is how many days have elapsed, and has anything major taken place during those days that might have affected the results. But then more important, unfortunately, when the election's over, you have to look carefully and see, are there any election petitions? Are there any complaints of rigging? And how valid are those complaints? Because maybe the poll was right and the official results were wrong. Now, the last election, which was nullified by the Supreme Court, you'll remember, they didn't nullify it because they counted votes and got a different total. The process. But obviously, if there's something very wrong with the process, you can't be absolutely sure of the results. We know in 2007, there were about 5 opinion polls that were done within the last couple of weeks of the election. And they all showed Raila was ahead, except one. Maybe there were 6. But anyway, there was one and all the rest. And then we had a lot of controversy about the results. There was no petition. We had terrible violence in the country. Even later on, the late chairman of the ECK, the late Samuel Kivuitu, said in an interview he wasn't sure who the winner was. Now, he didn't say, oh, because I saw a lot of polls, Raila must have been the winner. Because we don't know, were all those samples the same? Were they all done at the same time? How many days before the actual voting on 27th of December was there? But all I'm saying is, when you have doubts about the integrity of the official results, it makes it difficult to judge how accurate the polling is. And I'll just end by one thing. Before the constitutional referendum in November 2005, it was defeated, or before the one in 2010 that was approved, we had 3 or 4 survey firms doing polls. In those instances, the polls, all of them, were within 2 or 3% of what the official result was. By ECK in 2005 and by the interim IEBC in 2010. Nobody claimed there was any rigging with regard to 2005 or 2010, for those who are either in favor of or against. Now we know the Kibaki government in 2005 wanted that thing to be ratified. It lost with only 43% against 57% Orange, Chungwa. No. Nobody accused the Kibaki government of any rigging. The 43% and 57% yes was accepted. Likewise in 2010, I think it got something like 69% approval in favor of the new constitution. There was no claim of rigging. And the polls were just giving those numbers. And nobody made any accusations against the pollsters. But when we come to elections, and we have claims and petitions, whatever, and Supreme Court rulings and whatever, it's not easy to evaluate the accuracy of the pollsters when we can't be 100% sure about the official results. And that makes it very difficult. All I would say is to stop talking now is, I believe the more information that the consumers of surveys have, whether they're happy with the results or not, the stronger position they're in to challenge us and to challenge you people in the media on how you report the surveys. Because after all, at the end of the day, a democracy is only as strong as information and as the empowerment that you people in the media and ordinary citizens and in the political class have to challenge the information that they're getting. There's no point in going for a COVID vaccine if it hasn't been tested. Or if it's been tested and find that half the people who get it die. You better give them the information for their own benefit before they can make a decision. Nitajitokeza kuchanjwa au la. You know? We don't have a law in Kenya requiring people to get vaccinated, but the Ministry of Health is doing its utmost day and night to give people information. How many people in Kenya have died or even had reaction? It's very small. And they'll tell you the figures. Whether CS Kagwe or people at the ministry, people need information to make informed decisions. Whether it's about the dangers of smoking tobacco, or getting a COVID vaccine or believing a survey. So I really appreciate your effort, although I don't mean to cut off your final question. Go ahead.
It's okay. What you want to say is that you are grateful for creating time for Zonk News, and we really hope for more discussions, maybe in the fullness of time, Dr. Tom. Indeed, you are a reservoir of knowledge. And remember to follow our conversations bit by bit through our social media platforms. Facebook, Zonk News, Twitter, Zonk News, Instagram at Zonk News, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Zonk News. Until next time, goodbye.
And goodbye to you too.